Summary of Fear and Trembling by Søren Kierkegaard. This book is written by Søren Kierkegaard under the name Johannes de Silentio, which means John of the Silence. The first part of the book talks about modern society, which for Kierkegaard meant Europe in the 1800s, and how many people want to go beyond faith. But, as he points out, this means that people must have had faith at some point, or else they wouldn't have been able to go beyond it. In the modern world, people don't spend their whole lives on their faith. Instead, they either go beyond it or think they can reach it in a few weeks or months. The same is true for doubt. Things that used to take a lifetime to master are now things that people want to do almost right away. Kierkegaard says he is writing this book because he likes to write, even though he thinks the book will be forgotten or attacked. In Attunement, Kierkegaard tells the story of a man who learned the Bible story of Abraham and Isaac as a child and has always liked it, but as he got older, he understood Abraham less and less. The man thinks about 4 possible outcomes. Abraham tells Isaac what is going to happen and then tries to scare Isaac by pretending to be a murderous atheist so that Isaac will be mad at him and not at God. Abraham loses his faith after sacrificing the ram God sends before he kills Isaac. Abraham doesn't bring Isaac up the mountain but goes up alone to ask forgiveness for breaking his sacred duty as a father to Isaac by being willing to kill him. And Abraham doesn't bring Isaac even though all of these things could be true, the man still doesn't understand Abraham. Kierkegaard thinks Abraham was a great person, and he often calls him the father of faith. God told Abraham to leave his life behind and go into the desert. Abraham does this because he has faith and knows that God would never ask him to do something without a reason. God also tells Abraham that he and Sarah will have a son, and that his family will live all over the world. Even though both he and Sarah were very old, Abraham believed this word. His faith was proven right when Sarah had Isaac. But God tries Abraham again by telling him to kill Isaac as a sacrifice. Luckily, God stops Abraham before he does something he can't take back. Kierkegaard thinks that if Abraham had lost his faith, things might have turned out differently. However, Abraham kept his faith and went to Mount Moriah with Isaac even though it must have been hard and took 3.5 days. When people talk about Abraham's story, they tend to focus too much on how God stepped in at the last minute instead of how much Abraham had to go through to get to the point of the offering. Kierkegaard thinks that Abraham's greatness is shown not just by the moment he raised the knife, but also by the trip to Mount Moriah and the fact that he had to break universal rules to do God's will. Kierkegaard talks about 2 important moral steps that a person must take if they want to have hope. In the first, a person must give up everything forever, which is a huge sacrifice. In the second, they can take back what they gave up because it was silly. Something is ridiculous when it seems impossible and goes against everything we know. In other words, people who have faith think that God can make the impossible happen. Kierkegaard shows these 2 ideas with a story about a young man who loves a girl too much to let her go. His love for her is everything to him and will last forever, but they can't get married. When they realized they couldn't be together, a night of endless acceptance would give up their love, feel the pain of giving up their love, and then accept the pain. Even though he would still love her, he would have given up hope that they could be together in this life. A hero of faith, on the other hand, would follow the same steps, but at the moment of surrender, they would say that they would still get to be with the princess in this life. In this way, they get back everything they give up. This is what makes faith so great, but also so hard for people who don't have it to understand. Kierkegaard often says that he admires people who have faith, but he doesn't have the guts to take the final step into faith. Even though he knows people do it, he has a hard time understanding how they can. He has never met a knight of faith, but if he did, he would go all over the world to meet them and learn how to move spiritually like them. Also, Kierkegaard doesn't understand how people can talk about going further than faith, because anyone who really has faith would never give it up to go further. Kierkegaard again says that people pay too much attention to the end of a story and not enough to what happened before. Because of this, Kierkegaard thinks that people in the modern world should either forget all about Abraham or try to understand the whole story. Kierkegaard wants to look at the story through the lens of three problems to show how powerful and important faith is in the world of things. The first problem asks if there is an ethical uncertainty from a teleological point of view. The ethical is the universal, and everyone, as the particular, is expected to follow the ethical in order to fit in with the general. Faith, on the other hand, is a paradox in which the particular, the individual, rises above the universal. However, this can only happen if the individual is both part of the universal and separate from it. Either Abraham's actions can be explained by his faith, which can't be said in a way that everyone can understand, or he is a killer. Kierkegaard looks at the story from an ethical point of view and talks about other times when dads killed their children, like when Agamemnon killed his daughter Iphigenia to make a goddess happy. Because Agamemnon and other sad heroes do things that are good for everyone, ethics are put aside and they are seen as great. Abraham, on the other hand, seems to break this rule both for God's sake and for his own, so he could show how much faith he had. People don't feel for Abraham's pain because he was trying to reach something bigger than himself. Kierkegaard thinks that Abraham's actions were right because of the paradox of faith, which says that through faith, the individual can go beyond the general. Others, on the other hand, look at the end of his story, or any hero's story, to decide if what he did was right. But by doing this, they forget that every action has a start, and it's important to think about why people do things instead of just looking at the end result. More importantly, people don't pay attention to the sorrow and pain that great people feel when they are going through hard times. The story of Mary, who was the mother of Jesus Christ, is a good example. People praise her for giving birth to Jesus, but they forget that before she gave birth, she had to deal with a pregnancy that she couldn't explain to others because she was the only one the angel visited. When Kierkegaard thinks about Abraham again, he comes to the conclusion that either Abraham's faith made him a killer or that his faith made him a murderer. Kierkegaard's second question is whether or not there is an absolute duty to God. Kierkegaard says again that the ethical is the general, but that this is connected to the spiritual. Because of this, every task is a duty to God, even if it doesn't involve God directly. Even though Hegelian philosophy says that the outside is more important than the inside, faith is a paradox that says the inside, the person, is more important than the outside, the general. Only the person can have an absolute connection with the absolute, God, which means there is an absolute duty to God that makes the ethical, or universal, relative. Usually, duty is shown on the outside, but duty to God is shown on the inside. Because of this, it's hard for everyone to understand it in the same way. This is also why Abraham couldn't tell anyone else what his actions meant. If he had tried to explain them in a general way, he would have realized he was tempted. So, the road of a knight of faith is lonely and scary. The knight of faith is always on edge because they know they can always jump back into the universe, but they also know that the road of faith is better. This is what makes the knight of faith's journey so long and painful. A tragic hero, on the other hand, becomes a tragic hero as soon as they make their sacrifice, at which point they can rest in the universal and be praised by everyone. Through faith, there is an absolute duty to God that is higher than an ethical or general duty. If there wasn't, Abraham would be guilty. In the last problem, Kierkegaard asks if it was right for Abraham to keep God's order from Isaac, Sarah, and Eliezer. Even though it's more interesting to hide things, it's often against the rules of ethics to do so. Because of this, in theater, hiding things is used to build up stress and revealing them is used to get rid of it. Kierkegaard says that quiet can be either evil or good. He explains this idea with several stories. In one, a guy keeps quiet after he calls off his wedding after an augur tells him that something bad will happen to him if he gets married. The man decides to stay quiet because he thinks it's best for his future wife. This is what a holy silence looks like. In another story, the merman tries to seduce Agnete and drag her into the ocean, but he falls in love with her and changes his mind when he sees how innocent she is. In this case, the merman can make Agnete dislike him so that she stops loving him. This way, he can keep his secret and suffer his punishment, being separated from Agnete, in silence. This is a quiet from the devil because the merman is being tempted to suffer. But there are times when it's best to be quiet. Abraham couldn't make himself understood because faith is hard to understand. He didn't say anything so no one would get the wrong idea. This must make sense, and there must be a paradox that puts the person above the general, or Abraham should be judged. Kierkegaard wonders if society has come so far that it needs to act like it hasn't come far enough just to keep busy. When it comes to figuring out what their passions are, every generation has to start over. This is especially true of faith, which is the most important thing that people care about. Not everyone will get as far as faith, but Kierkegaard lets the reader decide how many people in the modern world do get that far. It's important to know that even if you don't have faith, there are still plenty of jobs and challenges to face in life, and that having faith doesn't always mean coming to a stop. You can live your whole life in faith, just like you can live your whole life in love.
About the author. Søren Kierkegaard was the youngest of Ane Srensdatter Lund and Michael Peterson Kierkegaard's 7 children. Michael was a rich businessman, and before he got her pregnant and married her, he worked as the family's maid. Kierkegaard loved philosophy from a young age, and reading Plato's Socratic discussions was one of his favorite things to do. Kierkegaard went to school at the University of Copenhagen, where he first studied religion and then switched to literature and philosophy. During this time, Kierkegaard fought to find a truth or idea that he could base his life on. This made him lose faith in Christianity and cause him to split up with his father. But Kierkegaard came to terms with both of them, and in 1841 he graduated from the University of Copenhagen. Over the next few years, Kierkegaard wrote and published articles under different names, such as Johannes de Silentio, Anticlimacus, Judge William, and Hilarious Bookbinder. Kierkegaard would sometimes print an essay under one pseudonym and then write a different essay under another pseudonym that contradicted the first. This gave 2 different views on the same topic. Kierkegaard became a controversial figure after he dared a famous satire paper, The Corsair, to make fun of him. It did, and Kierkegaard never quite got over being made fun of in public. He also criticized the Lutheran Danish National Church for being too lenient. Kierkegaard passed out in the street in October 1855, and he died a few weeks later in November. Some people don't agree on whether he died of TB or a cancer of the spine. Even though Kierkegaard was well known in his home country of Denmark during his lifetime, his works didn't get much attention outside of Denmark until the early to mid-20th century. Today, people call Kierkegaard the father of existentialism.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.